How about now? All right, can you at home hear me okay now? Good. Excellent. Well, good morning again. It's good to have all you here. It's good to see everyone. I want to just talk about, well, first I want to compliment Reverend Cal for those words. And I momentarily said to Reverend Yvonne, I thought Cal didn't preach. I mean, do I even need to get up and preach a sermon today? I'm not really sure that I do. But if you look at today's gospel, the one Reverend Yvonne just read, you know, Jesus is talking to the disciples again, and it's the continuation of what we heard last week. It's the conclusion of the extended discourse on being a disciple and going out and doing really the mission of Christ, what the disciples were called to do. And he's telling them last week the hardships that they're going to face, if you remember, what they're going to endure. And so the gospel today describes welcoming. It describes welcoming. Remember, think about this. You know, Jesus is sending the disciples out during a time that it's really chaotic and probably not safe to be a Christian. And the disciples had to depend on the compassion, the welcome of other people, of strangers, really, to survive. I mean, that must have been horribly scary. I mean, would any of us try that today? Probably not. Jesus said, whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. That sounds like we're not only connected to Jesus, but we're also connected to the one who sent him. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Kim and I attended the Church of the Epiphany. Many of you have heard me talk about this. It's a downtown church in Washington, D.C. It's at the corner of 13th and G Street. And I was the intern there for them when I was at the Virginia Theological Seminary, the flagship seminary of the Episcopal Church. And of course, there are 11, or 10. But the interesting thing that they did was that they offered a feeding ministry like no other church offered. And what I mean by that is that they welcomed people at 6 a.m. in the morning. The shelters kind of kicked people out, and you had to go find a place. And so the church there made a place. And so at 6 o'clock, folks would start showing up at the Church of the Epiphany. Kim and I had to be there at 5:30 in the morning. And that was rough. But the church offered a Bible study, a homeless choir opportunity where you could sing in a choir. They had a Narcotics Anonymous meeting that not only could they attend, but parishioners could attend, and a gospel art time. And the gospel art was one of my favorites because we would read the gospel, and then you had all kinds of art media that you could do from crayons to markers to pens to paint to just about everything. And this was called the welcome table. And everybody that came in would get a name badge. And you would go to one of these four things, and you participated with the congregation. So it wasn't the congregation serving this group of folks. They were the congregation. They were all part of the congregation. And on your badge was a number, and 1 through however many. And then at 8 o'clock, they offered a welcome table Eucharist. And that was a shortened version of our Eucharist with only 1 or 2 lessons. And they told me when I was practicing preaching that my sermon had to be 5 minutes long. What if I go over? It can't go over. Because we start serving promptly at 9 o'clock, and you have to be done. But they fed over 200 homeless people and a lot of non-homeless people. The role of the congregation was not to serve, although we had teams of people that served. The role of the congregation was to have breakfast with the other. Now think about that. We had breakfast together. This was a sit-down breakfast. So the unhoused parishioners who were at the 8 o'clock had breakfast at the welcome table with the non-unhoused parishioners. I know that's confusing. I did that on purpose. What am I saying? So the homeless people sat with the non-homeless people. And so part of my job was they had a program where youth groups from all over the country could come in and participate in this ministry. See what it's like to sit and have breakfast with someone that chances are you haven't met before or haven't encountered before. And my job was to teach them really to be present and not and to listen. And what do you say? You know, I mean, how do you talk? How do you interact with this person? You know, and for the youth group kids, it's not like, well, what are you hoping to get for Christmas this year? Or, you know, or are you going to watch the game today? Or you had to be very careful so part of it was teaching folks that are used to talking to listen and to hear the story of this person. And it was very enlightening. You know, you had to be really present for somebody. I had a very unique experience. I had an experience where I sat with a person who was born in Muncie, Indiana. I was born in Muncie, Indiana. He was born at Ball Memorial Hospital in 1959. I was born at Ball Memorial Hospital in 1959. He played basketball. I played basketball. He went on to play basketball in high school. I went on to get cut in high school. He went on to play in college, and then he went on to the NBA, and then he lost his spot, and then he spent all of his money, and he became unhoused. But here's the thing. I mean, we have so much in common. I mean, and that was like a big brick hitting me. We have our humanity in common with all these people. So my job was to teach folks how to talk to someone that they typically didn't talk to. And that was a good experience for me. And you can imagine how hard it would be to talk to somebody, you know, that lives on the street. And part of it is just listening and having them felt that they were heard. You know, there were at the time there were 12,000. I Googled this last night. There are 8,000 homeless people in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, the wealthiest nation in the world. And so it was very humbling to eat at this welcome table. And I think it's also fair to say that the ones who learned the most were not the ones that came in at 6 o'clock. The rest of us kind of learned. But this is what it was about. It was about the gesture of welcoming, of accepting, of respecting, of presence, and of loving. And over the course of our time there, we got to know and to love that congregation. We had another interesting thing happen one time when their coffee wasn't very good. I know you're going to find that hard to believe. Kim and I had stopped at a Starbucks, and we were working our way back into church. And I'll deny this in an ecclesiastical court of law if you report me. We were on time. But as we were going in, there was a homeless person coming out, and he was carrying everything he owned. And at the time, the nave was going under construction, so we had done meals to go. And he had a meal to go in a bag, and he had a banana on top of that. And he's carrying all this out, and the banana falls down. And Kim immediately reaches down, picks it up and puts it back up and pats it down and says something like, "There you go. I got it for you." And we went on into church because we were almost going to be late. And so a few minutes later, as we're in the community center, this guy comes running back in looking for Kim. And he finds her and he says to her, you know, think about this. He put all his belongings outside on the street, leaving them at risk to come back and to thank her. And he said to her something like this. He said it was people like her that gave people like him hope. And I believe it all starts with gestures. It starts with our gestures. It starts with how we treat each other, both silent and non-silent. And that's how we're going to change the world. Not in one big bang, but it's one gesture at a time, one person at a time. That's how our children learn. You know that do as I say, not as I do say? There's a lot of truth in that. But they learn from us how to treat other people. You know, there's at the Pride picnic, for example, we had St. Mark's Episcopal Church, in Plainfield. We had the Satanic Temple next to that, and then we had Good Sam's right here. And you think about that, that was like a satanic sandwich of some kind. What'd they say? Let's put the Episcopalians on either side. They won't be able to move. There's an invisible line there. No. And I'd asked I was going to go over and talk to them, but I'd asked one of our parishioners to go over and just talk to them and find out, what's going on there. And he did, and I kind of was listening because we were right next door. We were close. We could hear everything they said, and they could hear everything we said. But what I remember hearing at the very end was that this person said, he asked him about their tenants, and they explained what the deal was. And at the very end, he said, well, I'm glad you're here. And I Googled them. And they have 7 tenants. They profess to be non-Christian, a non-Christian organization. They don't like church. They don't like institutionalized church. But their tenets sound very familiar to some of ours. And it's do justice. And they didn't use these words, but respecting the dignity of every human being. And I'm going, these sound very Christian-like to me. And it's okay if you say they're not Christian, but they sound Christian to me. But the point is, welcoming is important. Welcoming. And if we say that we're going to welcome, that we're going to love all people, serve all people, and include all people, the Satanic Temple has to be included. And that's hard. That's hard, but I'm glad that he went over and talked to them, because I don't think anybody else was. A couple folks came off. Jesus said, whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. But it's not really just about being a welcoming organization. We also have to be an inviting congregation. And that means that we have to develop our skills at invitation and inviting others to come to Good Sam's. Even maybe even offering to pick them up. Many would say that we are a welcoming church, and I believe that. Michael Harvey, who's an internationally known mission expert, he's a speaker and a coach, and he authored the book called Creating a Culture of Invitation in Your Church. He asked this question. He said, how welcoming can we be if we're not inviting? If people come in and we are welcoming, but how do they know how to come in? How do they know to come in the first place? What about all those people outside the walls of the church? We are talking about putting our signs out on Saturday so that all those folks driving by Saturday night. Now, the school corporation may not like that, but until they tell us to stop, they've said we can put out signs, and so we're going to do that. But think of all the traffic that goes by here. That's one way, perhaps, to be inviting, is to let people know where we are. But another thing is, what if each one of us invited someone? One of the problems that we face when we're just a welcoming church is people show up that we didn't invite. Well, how rude of them to do that. But what if people showed up that we did invite? Imagine if we had a culture of invitation, and then that person who did the invitation perhaps introduces that person to other people within our congregation. What if they were sort of like sponsors? We tend to leave the welcoming to specific people. The greeters or the welcome committee. They're doing all that. Now, we got to be careful not to over-welcome folks when they come in. There are horror stories like, no, thank you, that's the 3rd welcome bag I've gotten. I've been here 3 Sundays in a row. We don't want that to happen. Invitation and welcome are part of a 3-legged stool that we have, invite, welcome, and connect. And I'm just talking about welcoming and invitation today. But what if we modeled that? Last week, Reverend Yvonne said, what would we do if we weren't afraid? Perhaps we're afraid to be our authentic selves and invite someone to this experience. And I understand. We're all afraid of rejection. I'm afraid of rejection. But every single shot you don't take, you miss. Every single person you don't invite doesn't come here, doesn't hear what we are about. And I get it. You work up the courage to invite somebody, and you invite them, and then they either don't show up, or when they do show up, they don't come back again. But that's okay. We did what we were supposed to do. And once they're here, it's up to the Holy Spirit. They can stay or not stay. And that's totally okay. And we've said this all along. If you're not being spiritually fed here, then let me help you find a place you can be spiritually fed. But our role is to invite. You know, here's a very sad statistic. The average Episcopalian will invite one person in their lifetime to come to church. We're known as the frozen chosen. So what if we did step out of our comfort zone? You know, Michael Harvey, he gave up this highfalutin job in city of London to teach church leaders the new possibilities. He started this Back to Church Sundays. And what that was is he challenged churches of all sizes to double their congregation in a single day by daring people to invite their friends to church. Their friends, their family. Who could use a little bit of Jesus in their lives? Just about everybody. The results were remarkable. And it takes a very brave person to walk into a church on their own nowadays, says Michael. But God is still speaking to them. Perhaps sometimes all they need is a gentle invitation to come. So perhaps the charge for us is not only to be the welcoming church that we are, but to be the inviting church, to invite others to come on Sundays. I think this is our role here. This is what we're going to need as we grow and evolve into the village hub. We're going to have to learn the power of invitation. Jesus said, "Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me." Amen.